How do you want to be remembered? What do you want to be your legacy?
Hey listeners, welcome to In the Arena. I'm Jackie Goldberg.
And I'm Leah Smart. And today we are here with Hoby Darling, who's a senior executive at Logitech and the co-founder of Liminal Collective, which we're so excited to talk more about. Hoby was actually introduced to us by my manager, Jess, who worked with him at Logitech. And all she kept saying was, you have to talk to him. You have to meet him. So we decided, okay, great, we're going to meet him. So today you'll hear more about why. But Hoby's focus is really about helping others and people reach peak performance. And one of the great things he said to us when we were prepping for this episode was that his real focus is helping people go from great to legendary. So, Hoby, we are so excited to have you on today and to hear more about what that means.
I love it. Leah and Jackie, well, it's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Welcome. So before we get into the meat and potatoes of the interview, we have a tradition on In the Arena where we like to do some speed dating questions just to get to know you a little bit better. So are you open to going in the arena with us?
I'm in the arena. Let's go.
You're in it. And I will tell our listeners that all of you most likely know at this point that In the Arena comes from the quote, "Man in the Arena" by Teddy Roosevelt. And we were super excited and knew this was just kin for us to be meeting all together because Hoby has the quote printed out on his desk. So love that so much.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's one that I look at a lot. I mean, I think we see with a lot of high performers, a lot of it is that courage to get in the arena, you know, to be able to step in with that enthusiasm, with the devotion, hit that worthy cause and be okay with the dust and sweat and blood on the brow. So
yeah, so much better than being the spectator, right?
Absolutely.
So much more worthwhile. All right, cool. So I will kick us off with our rapid fire. So first question, where is the most beautiful place that you've ever visited?
Most beautiful place, probably the 12 Apostles in Australia, which if you haven't been there is just an absolutely beautiful, craggy shoreline that has 12 sort of large rocks coming out of it, often just overcast with clouds. But I think just that, you know, feels so small and such a beautiful place.
Sounds beautiful. Natural beauty.
Absolutely amazing.
That's right. I loved Australia when I went. So I did not get to the 12 Apostles, but I will add to my list.
Always need something to go back for.
I know, right? Except for that long flight, Hoby. I don't know. Still questionable for me. All right. So what's something you've done that you originally thought was beyond your limits?
That's a good question. So I was pretty lucky to grow up in a household where pretty much I was taught you can do anything, Hoby. So I probably grew up a dreamer in a lot of ways. I think like most people, even with that background though, definitely put governors on what I thought was possible. Probably the biggest one for me around that was academically. I think I grew up kind of that jock kid versus being the smart kid. So one thing I really never thought was possible was achieving at a high academic standard. So, you know, being kind of this kid from a small town and then being able to get graduate degrees and go to Columbia, Northwestern, and Berkeley. Those were probably things I just never thought were possible, both being from a small place, but also I just hated math growing up. And so to be able to get MBAs and some other degrees, they're so math heavy, was probably a big one. That would probably be my mental one. And then I probably have to share too, you know, so much of what I enjoy is on the physical side. And so each year we kind of have 15 or 20 of us that work out together in Park City in the mornings and a couple that are around the country. But we do it out of this idea of a crucible event each year. And part of the rules of that are it has to be something that's not possible for you today and it scares you a little bit. So some of those crucibles are things that definitely push the limits. Some fun ones, you know, swimming in the English Channel and rucking to St. Lo in Normandy, to the Run Swim Odyssey Endurance Challenge, which was like a 40-mile run and swim, some 50K obstacle races. But I think some of those big ones where you just went, man, I don't know if we're going to be able to do this, but maybe even better, we weren't going to be able to do it as a team, and we're able to pull it together as a team.
Wow, that's huge. I love this idea of the Crucible event. We'll talk more about that. But I remember when I read your bio on Liminal, it said, it was like, if Hoby's not walking his dog, he's running on a 45-mile trail run. I think that's totally normal.
I do like that. That is true.
Yeah. Wow, so much goodness there. I'm excited to talk more about pushing the limits and pushing our own limits and thinking through that. But also awesome, like so much pride, I think, for the academic stuff. Like, thanks for sharing that. And something that also came up for me, Jeff Weiner, who used to be the CEO of LinkedIn and recently resigned a few months ago, is now the executive chairman. But he tells a story how every night before bed, his parents, when they tucked him in, told him, you can do anything you want in this world. You can be anything, you can be anyone. And he talks about that as one of the number one influences in his success in life, his career, but personal success, all of it. And so see a lot of alignment there.
Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting you say that, Jackie, because I had the same thing. I mean, I had a mom and I can still remember the nighttime, sort of nursery rhyme / phase, but it started with that, you are strong as a lion, powerful as a tiger, but essentially you're capable of anything. And I think you're right, especially at a young age, you hear that enough and then you do it. And then, whether it's at a sporting event or it's at school, then a high five comes after it and you really believe it so much.
Of course, you internalize it. So important. Awesome. So, well, this is actually, so on the physical side, what is your go-to sport or athletic activity now? As you said, you grew up, as a jock, you played activities or sports your throughout life, but what are you up to right now?
Sure. Well, I should probably say I grew up as a very poor jock, i.e. I was never that good, but I always sort of thought of myself that way. Today it's probably changed. I used to be much more the bat and ball kid. Now getting to live in Park City up in the mountains, definitely a lot more around outdoor endurance, trail running, mountain biking. Love to throw in some high intensity interval training, kind of CrossFit style type stuff. And like I say, we're usually trying to do it around some big event. So it's not just, kind of go train to train. It's go train to do something with a group. So usually it'll kind of, if it's a big swim year or if it's a big trail running year, it'll push that direction a little bit, but always kind of that full body functional movement type stuff.
Yeah. Such a difference when you train with a goal in mind and somewhere to go, right?
Training with intent. I mean, I think you hit it. It's so easy. I think so many people get into, I just need to go train, or, I need to get up and go to the gym this morning. But when you actually have intent to that, the dedication becomes much easier to do. So yeah, I think about that a lot. It's like having intent and then having a team around you, I think are two of the greatest lessons I've learned around that, to be able to do some pretty cool things.
Yeah. Jackie and I were training for the marathon, which just passed because it did not happen, but we're doing it next year. So I think just learning that lesson of like having even one other person that I was doing this with, and even with it being a year away, it's funny because I'm still running a lot and I'm like, what's my job? My job is to keep myself in good enough shape to be able to train for a marathon in July of next year. Like it feels so easy to repeat that and just continue to run because of it.
Yeah.
Totally. What marathon were you all training for?
The New York Marathon.
Oh, you were. So you had a big one coming up.
Yeah.
50th anniversary, like whole shebang. So,
and this was also a 2-year goal because Leah and I, so New York has a program called 9+1. If you run 9 races through New York Roadrunners and then volunteer for one in a year, you automatically qualify for the next year in 2020. So January of 2019, Leah and I signed up for all of our races. We ran everyone together. And we qualified. And then it was like a 2-year goal because we had that year and then we had to start training. But once COVID hit and things were up in the air, it was pretty sad, getting that calendar update or reminder on this past Sunday, November 1st or November 2nd, that New York City Marathon. And I was like, wow, we would have been there. But it rained here. So it actually was a little bit of a blessing maybe.
So were both of you runners, or how did you decide to do the marathon together?
Yeah, I mean, Jackie had run more long distance than I had. I grew up running track. And so I kind of had this goal at the end of 2018 that I wanted to start running more. And then Jackie was like, I'm doing this 9+1. And we said, all right, let's sign up together. And like she was doing it and I jumped on board, and I had never run more than 3 miles ever. And I think I cheated during that.
I mean, it's so interesting you say that, Leah, because I think, even in that, when you think about that transition from being a high performer and running track to going, now I'm going to do something different, and even the lessons in high performance in that, where you don't just throw a marathon on the books going, hey, I may have been great at running short distances, but now I'm going to do something that requires a training plan, that requires the dedication. And I think, as you said, requiring a friend to be there and go, okay, I'm going to get up and get this going.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about team before with your events that you do, and like having an accountability partner, having someone to do this with, it definitely helps in terms of motivation and just having that person.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, even in that, just with this Park City group that we have, that's just kind of 15 or 20 people that are pretty consistent, all go socially distanced workout. It's usually at 5:30 or 6 in the morning. So it's kind of dark and cold here. But it was just 2 nights ago, and I was going to take Tuesday off. My ankle's kind of been bumming me out a little bit. Doesn't feel great. And, one of the people sent me a text like, hey, are we on tomorrow or not? Like, let's go. And I went from, you know what, I'm just going to kind of sleep in tomorrow. Tomorrow's going to be a little bit of just a recharge day, to sending out an email to the rest of the group of let's go. And it may have been the most beautiful morning in Park City that we've had all season. Just stars out. We were running in the mountains. And I think, you just hit it. It's like that person, that group that inspires you to get up and get going. So important. I know, at least for me.
Yeah, it's been huge for us too, and will continue to be over the next year until the marathon happens. All right, Hoby, one more question, then we're going to jump in. What is one thing on your bucket list that might surprise people, maybe even people who know you?
That's a good question. I think most people who know me know I love things like movement, love travel, love sports. So it'd probably be something that would be outside of that my friends don't even think of me around. So I think it would probably be 2 things that really come to mind around that are, one, I've always had a dream, probably since I was at Nike, of looking at all the sketches that Mark Parker would do up on the walls of Nike, of shoe designs and so forth, of being able to sketch really well is something that I've never been able to do, is sort of a different part of my brain than being an executive. So I definitely get excited about that one. And then the second one, I'm always threatening my kids with this because they're both pretty good musicians and have really good musical ears. I played saxophone for a number of years, kind of from middle school all through high school. And then when I graduated from high school, I was like, oh my gosh, I never want to play that again. It wasn't the cool thing to do. And so I'm always threatening and can't wait to, when the right time, to pull the saxophone back out and be able to get a little jazz band going.
I love that. I used to play cello and I did the same thing. I tossed it away and now I'm like, oh God, why did I do that? So that's one of my bucket lists too.
We'll play together. It'll be a good jazz, little cello, little alto saxophone. We'll be rocking it.
It'll be great.
Wait, one quick thing I just want to say, Hoby. I just started the book Shoe Dog, so Phil Knight's autobiography. And I think I'm like 100 and something pages in, but it's still called Blue Ribbon. So I'm like, I know where Nike comes from the beginning of the book, but I'm excited to like get to that next phase. So just talking about, or hearing that you worked at Nike and some of your experiences there just like resonates right now because I'm reading about it and I feel so connected to it.
It's a great, I think that is one of the best entrepreneurial books out there, because I think you read so many entrepreneurship books, and it's all about just the glory and, we made this $1 billion company where we inspired billions of people. And I think Phil Knight did a magical job on that, of going, it was hard. And you know what? Not only was it hard, there were times where our values were tested and, we even did some things that were a little shady to get by. And this is what it looked like. But I think that nitty gritty back to in the arena, of like fully being in the arena. And this is what it's like to build something great.
Yeah. And also just the purpose that he had and the meaning he had just shows how much commitment there is and what you can do when you stay committed, no matter how tough things get. It's just such a life lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when your, initial feedback on that from your professors is that's a terrible idea. You're never going to beat your Japanese competitors on this. And so not even great job, go chase it. It's just that soul desire that goes, yep, I can go make this happen.
Yeah, super inspiring.
All right, so tell us, Hoby, who are you? Who is Hoby Darling? What do we need to know?
Wow, starting with big questions, Leah. I like it. No messing around.
You're in the arena. You got to start big.
I think personally what I identify with first and probably have the greatest pride, but also humility around is I always think first, I'm a father, I'm a spouse. That's where I get my greatest inspiration are from my kids. I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 12-year-old daughter. And I love nothing more than coaching them, being their lacrosse coach, being there as they hit their highs and lows. So that's a big part of me. I think you learn a lot about me just with where I live. I live up in the mountains in Park City. I mean, we just love the outdoors, love nature, love the creativity that Sundance brings. And it's a place, just from an athletic sports orientation, that it feels like 20% of the population's an Olympian. You're running up a mountain and you think you're clipping along and someone goes past you at, significantly faster, and you get up to the top of the mountain and are asking them where they're from. And they're like, oh yeah, I was a silver medalist in the Vancouver Olympics. So it's a great place for that. And then I love things like travel. I've been really fortunate to live abroad in Australia, Mexico, and Greece. So I think that international vibe is a big part of who I am and who I've become. So that's probably my personal side. I'd almost pull back as you asked that question, because it's an exercise I was just redoing the other day. But it was a question around, what are your top 3 values that identify you, that could really just be you. If someone heard them, they'd be like, oh, that's Hoby Darling. I know who that is, not sort of just generic. So I often think back to that when someone asks who I am. And so for me, that was like, I am at my best and I know I am performing at my highest. And I said, 1, when I'm inspiring. I mean, I love being able to be an amplifier of others and be in service to others, makes me feel great. Number 2 was really being in that caring situation, not to just sort of being a passing thing or transactional, but really being deep with people or a cause. And then my last one was around growing. So I always like, what's the next? What am I doing? How am I getting better? How are the people around me getting better? So that's a big one for me on who I am that I think really defines myself. And then I guess the last one I would say, there's probably one where people start most is probably their career journey, et cetera. I might actually put that last as I am, but, for me, so much has been about just being around great people who've inspired me, and that could be really random, but the beautifulness of it. I grew up in this tiny little small town, definitely more orchard than people. I think I graduated with 53 other people, had no desire to go to college. I mean, really just went to college because I wanted to play sports, got there for a year, dropped out of school, one that few people knew or know. But, that was a time for me where I felt like I really had to find myself and where I wanted to be and who I wanted to be. So I went and lived in Mexico for a while and, learned Spanish and just, I think, again, kind of got that, who do I want to be? Who am I? As Hoby Darling, almost to your question, then came back and have just been, super fortunate to, as I say, work with some great teams, but also at some great companies, from Volcom back in the day, which is one of the early action sports companies, to being up at Nike and getting to lead a couple divisions of Nike, to being the CEO of Skull Candy, to now doing what I'm doing, where it's probably bringing together almost all of my passions at Logitech and as a founder of Liminal Collective, with Liminal just really being all around how do we help individuals, teams, and organizations create this humanity 2.0, but really this leap from where we are today to where we can be in the future.
Wow. Thank you. So appreciate the scope of your answer and love that you didn't start with career. Leah and I were actually talking about this last week, is that so many times, and you see this in New York a lot too, when you say like, tell us about yourself or, what's going on? Like people always start with their career. And it's like, feels very defining for a lot of people, is like, what I do is what defines me. And I love that you flipped that around, right? And recognizing that actually it was finding yourself, it's being intentional about living out your values every day. And that is what guides you to being in a career that you love and that is so fulfilling to you, because you're living that out day to day with who you are versus what you do.
Well, I think what you said there, Jackie, it's interesting because I take one as a point of reference, on New York, and maybe it's even a point of reference versus Park City. And as we look around the nation, I think in Park City, it's almost if you ask somebody what they do, it's looked down on. Like what most people ask here is like, what bike do you ride? What mountain do you ski? What do you love? And so it's interesting, I think, even to your point, like orientation of where you are, how people put you in boxes. And I mean, I think as we know, we all, have very Aristotelian brains that want to organize and go, Jackie is this, Leah is this, and be able to make that simple and easy versus going, no, a lot of things, and we're a lot of things to different people. I'm a different thing to my 12-year-old daughter than I am to my colleagues in Liminal. And those are very different relationships. But, just from the neuroscience of how our brain works, we want to categorize. It's interesting even in that, like we were talking about, we have a new offense at Logitech called the Elite Performer Offense that's working with some of the best athletes, activists, actors, musicians in the world, et cetera. And one of the things that's been so cool to see across it and working with some of these people, is even initially when we went in, it's like, hey, we want to bring you in to look at your biggest dreams around how you're a musician. And the person would go, yeah, but I don't think of myself as a musician. I think of myself as an entrepreneur. I think of myself as a creator. I think of myself as a father or mother. I think of myself as an activist. And I think that's a big change, even over the last, let's call it 10 years, decade, however we want to think about a generation, is that part that goes, Jackie, Leah, don't put me in a box. Like, I know you want to put me there, but I'm so much more than that box. And so I think even in that process, I think it makes all of us better if we can appreciate around it too.
Totally. Couldn't agree more. Curious, you hit on Liminal Collective, which is, I think you founded it. You can tell us a little bit more about how you got that started, but you talked about Humanity 2.0. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I will pull it back just a little bit to Liminal because the origin story is important in that, a group of us who I would say had been very successful at things that we'd done, me kind of in the business, innovation, creativity side, my other co-founder, Andy Walsh, who had started Red Bull's high performance group, had been with the US Olympic Committee at a very high level, Australian Institute of Sport, when they were pulling that together for the Sydney Olympics. And I think for us, we were both trying to go, what does it look like if we can take what we've learned, let's just call it working with these elite 1% type groups to make them better? What would it look like if we could really make a dent and instead of just making them, to your point, as you started, go from great to legendary, but be able to take their inspiration and what we learned from them and what they've created and be able to uplift the other 7 billion people on the planet. And so that's why we think about it in that Humanity 2.0 part goes, if we really want to make substantial change or make that dent in the universe or, in our humanity, if we can line up starting with the individual, let's make individuals better. And then let's make teams better and organizations better off of that then empowers us to really be able to have this much bigger framework of what could it look like around the globe to truly improve humanity. And I think, when you start to get together the people that are in Liminal and the greater collective, and it's some of the, greatest minds of our time in it, whether it's professors from Stanford and Northwestern and neuroscientists and special forces and athletes and surgeons. And, you kind of go this massive interdisciplinary group of people that, get excited about this bigger idea. They don't go, I just want to do this small thing. They go, man, let's put out a moonshot idea of truly how do we up-level a planet or up-level, a species, for lack of a better word. And then people start to go, oh my gosh, now I can bring together science with research, with storytelling, with big events, with new ways of thinking, with, new groups of people to do it. And so that's how we brought together Liminal and why we always kind of come back to that. We may play with that 1% performer a lot, but we really do it because we want to bring that inspiration and learning to everybody else.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about that 1%. I love the phrase up-level a species. I was like, oh my God, I'm inspired. Yeah, that's huge. For anyone who feels like they're not part of that 1%, it often is like, it's those people that, you meet on the slopes who are like, I was a silver medalist or a gold medalist. We look at them as sort of this elite part of our species. And what I'm curious about, Hoby, is what are you finding in them that's common that allows them to reach this 1%? And then, of course, you're probably going to know, or you probably know I'm going to want to know. And I don't know if you know, how do we get everyone else to get there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And a couple of things that I would start off with on it is, one, there's a tremendous amount of research around this piece. And if you look at it, there is no clear answer across it. It's not one of those parts where you go, here's the 10-step plan, on the front of a magazine to high performance or winning a gold medal, et cetera. So I would take that, number one across it, and I would even frame it in people get to greatness in a lot of different ways. I mean, we see some people that, early in their career, the Mozarts of the world, some of the early mathematicians that are in their teens that are doing, this unbelievable work. You see other people that very much later in their career become amazing. You see some people who have one big accomplishment and are remembered for that, others who do, lots of different things. So I think it's important to put that in context as well. And then the third thing, I would just put in context as you asked that question, Leah. And again, I'm sort of pulling this back to what does that 1% have in common is how we like to think about it a lot is that we frame this in the idea of long-term high performers. So long-term 1%. So people who are flourishing and thriving over time versus people who, for lack of a better word, maybe that one hit wonder, maybe for a very short amount of time in their overall career doing amazing things, but then burn out. So who are those people that we go, wow, over a career, they've been exceptional at what they've done and have really thrived throughout that. So if I think about that in that frame, again, no 10-part frame to this, but I think a thing that we do see a lot, and I'll sort of break this down, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 things, that we think about, and one's the obvious. Talent helps. And no matter what you do, there's something to be said for straight up talent when talking about the best in the world, right? If we're talking sports, just to make it easy, really hard to take someone who is 100% slow twitch muscles and put them and say, we're going to win the 100-meter gold medal in the Olympics, right? So there is just something talent-wise that I think some people don't acknowledge. You just got to, yep, talent matters around what some of this is. I think once you get through that, though, there are some frameworks that become really important that you can look at. And I'll start with a little bit how we work with high performers around that. So generally, the first thing we do and we see in high performers is they really know themselves, right? And you think about a human being the most complex thing on the planet, how do we deeply know ourselves? And that could be around, how do I as an individual, whether it's Jackie or Leah, which will be totally different than someone else, how do I best know how to set goals for myself? How do I know how to control my self-talk and emotional control? How do I best know how to motivate me, right? What may motivate me may be totally different than what motivates you. How do I think about being in a peak performance state? What are we going to call that? Flow states or zones of proximal development, however we think about that. But, all of those just go back to that of I have to be, if I'm going to be the best in the world at what I do over time, I have to be a student of myself, right? So pulling that back and going almost one is how do I get so good at me that I can then be great at the craft that I want to be great at. So I would put that just kind of going talent, really knowing yourself. The third one that I think you see, in all these fields, and again, I'll put it in a bucket under, let's just call it positive psychology, but I think there's a fundamentals piece that these people who are operating at a high level over time have a massive amount of grit and dedication. We can talk about that from the Angela Duckworth work, et cetera, but make it as basic as, you go see a Michael Jordan, you go see the best in the world, and what are they doing? They are dedicated to their craft, right? Back to that enduring, consistent effort, even in struggle to get where they're going. So something to be just said on, they just know where they're going and they keep going. Second one I would say is really important out of that we see high in the research is around self-efficacy. I know both of you are experts around that, but this idea of high performers are generally really good at going, I'm going to control what I can control. I'm not going to worry about things I can't control, but I have a massively positive outcome belief around that. So I'm not worrying about other things. I'm laser focused on what I can control, but I believe that the outcome is going to be really good and optimistic. Some great work by Bandura at Stanford and some other places around that backs that up as well. And then I think the last one that I would just hit on kind of on that fundamentals of performance with positive psych would be around mindset, coachability, the Carol Dweck pieces, and I just pull that even back. Those are the things that go back to it's okay to fail. It's more important to have courage and take the shot than it is to worry about if I miss it, right? And so I can be the best me that I can be, and they're not worried about that outside world. I mean, it always sort of pulls me back to that Michael Jordan quote, which I think, should be on the front of mindset and Carol Dweck, but around I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I think I've lost almost 300 games, 26 times I've been trusted to take the game-winning shot and missed. I failed over and over. That's what makes me succeed. So I think, just back to those. And then the last one that I think gets overlooked a lot in that performance psychology piece is around self-compassion and empathy. We work with a lot of great athletes, a lot of great performers. And one of the things they have that's really positive is, again, that ability, that drive. I want to do better. I'm neurotic about, getting that 1% every day. The flip side to that is, the quick emotional toilet bowl of when it's not going my way, I fall and I'm not great and I'm not doing good. So that ability to have the self-talk around compassion and empathy of, you know what, I'm giving my best. That's okay. This is what I have today. That's okay around those. So I'd sort of put that in a bucket, like I say, in positive psychology. 4, we talked about it. Great performers have great teams around them. A lot of the time, one person gets the glory, but it's the team that makes it happen. You look at that, you think about a driver in F1 and the driver gets all the glory, but there are, probably 100 people on that team that have made the car run, are in the pit, are part of the nutrition, are part of the team. So what is that great team that's around it? It takes me back, and I know both of you, just even what you've talked around with your marathon piece, back to that, surround yourself with 5 great people, or you're the average of those 5 great people, is a big part on that team piece. 6, I would probably say, and this is one that evolves, again, back to that, we're talking flourishing and thriving over time, but they are people who have a bigger why, but it happens later in their career often. So, a lot of times we'll work with younger athletes or younger creatives, and, they're almost looking for that bigger why, and they're frustrated because they don't have it, or people are going like, gosh, you just care about yourself. You haven't hit this bigger why. What usually happens, though, is over time, those best in the world, they start to go, again, I want to be great, but how do I get to legendary? Back to that powerful question, what do I want my legacy to be? How do I want to be remembered? That just starts to open that up and make it bigger. And then I think the last one I would hit, and we've talked about it in pieces of this, is just creativity and courage. I think that ability to go out and just try new things, learn from others, but do it your way. That way that just takes not what somebody else did, what the person before you did, but that brings forth the best you. And I think we see this all the time with people who change the world by how they play the game or how they play the music, and it's the shift from what was going on in music to then you have an Elvis that sounds totally different, or a Beatles who then sounds totally different off of that, changing how we think about music. In sports, it's a Wayne Gretzky playing hockey in a totally different way, or a Michael Jordan or a Magic Johnson, to just rethink how it's played. So I think that part, never just forgetting the very best in the world don't just look at what came before them. They have the courage to go, I'm going to try this a little bit differently. I'm going to try this in a way that I think is going to get the best out of me. And they're comfortable, in those liminal places of in transition, reinvention, doing something different, and originality across those. So I'll pause there, but if I had to, kind of pick 7, those would be my big 7.
I love hearing those. I'm curious because I think we probably want to dive in to all 7, which is may not be possible today. But before we dive in, God, Hoby, the 1% sounds tiring. I'm like, oh my God, I want to be in it. And holy crap, I also know how prevalent burnout is right now and how much so many of us are facing this year. So I'm curious the role that you see rest, and maybe that falls into self-compassion, but how are these 1%ers also giving their minds, bodies, and souls a break?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question. And I take it back to that piece that goes, we want to see people thriving over time, not just I'm great in the moment. And if you think about that from, let's take a corporate career, since all of us working at corporations, and you go, we will probably work from somewhere around the time, let's call it we're 18, 20, whatever, until we're 65 and maybe until we're 100 based upon what we know now and especially know about happiness, doesn't really come from retiring. So let's say we're going to have 80-year careers. And you think about that and you pull back for a second, you go, wow. So I want to be high performing for 80 years. And I think it reframes how you think about, what is, to use the where you guys are going back to, like, what is a marathon? What is a sprint? If we pull that back and, I'll pull it all the way back to, and it's a great article to read, the old Jim Lair and Tony Schwartz article of Corporate Athlete that was in Harvard Business Review, I think all the way back in 2001. But it's that idea that goes, if we look out as most people, let's call it fans for a moment, and we look at great performers, we go, oh my gosh, they are amazing. Look what that athlete did on the court. Look what that, player did on the pitch or on the field. And look at what they're doing for their career. And you go, they're on an annual 3-year, if you're an Olympian, 4-year cycle of going, what's my goal? How am I going to train to get there? What does it look like within that training so that I'm improving every day? When is game day and how am I going to be ready for game day? How do I then regenerate after game day, which is where all the improvement comes. It doesn't come during the training. It comes during the regeneration piece. And then I'm repeating that over and over and over and over again. And so I think you pull that back and let's put ourselves just for a second and go, if Jackie and Leah said, no, I want to look more like a corporate athlete than just someone who goes to work, what would that look like? And I would advocate going first, think of this is not about a 1-week sprint. This is about an 80-year career. So let's just change our frame of reference, right? And let's just go, the past is not what we're doing going forward. This is the long term. And so I need to be in a space where if I look out 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, I'm performing really well. So if I'm an athlete in that, again, what am I doing? I'm in a constant goal setting, constant training, constant game day, constant regeneration. And if I'm not getting those, I'm not performing at my best, right? So if you hop right into the regeneration piece, what I tell people that are in corporate America is, yeah, there are times where it is game day. It is absolutely game day. You know what? You're dropping a new product, it's game day. For you all, hey, we have a podcast, it's game day. We have this, some CEO who's having their IPO, it's game day. You know what? You plan game day. But what do you do after game day when you're beat up? You regenerate and you appreciate it and go, I was just in game day. Now I need to regenerate. And I think the worst thing we talk about is even when people say, I'm going on vacation. I'm doing this. And I wish we could reframe that to go, no, I'm in regeneration mode because regeneration mode is growth mode. This is where I go from this game to then being the best in the next game. I have to regenerate so that I'm on an uphill trend. And I think then you pull that all the way back to how do I know when I'm regenerating best? That might be different for Hoby than it is for Jackie, than it is for Leah. For me, I know knowing myself, that's get outside and run in nature. I know that's be with my kids. I know that's travel. I know that's I love to read. So put myself in those situations. But what are those things where you go, yep, this is regeneration and it is on my calendar. And just like if I were a pro athlete, it is an essential part of my training. And we've just got to ditch the part that goes, I'm going to, go from graduating from grad school and I want to retire as fast as I can. And I'm just going to burn it as hard as I can, across that. Because one, we're never going to get to performance even in that shorter term. But we've got to rethink how we just think about, I think, thriving and flourishing for an entire life across that.
Such good perspective to have on that. What I found so intriguing by the 7 things that you listed around, being a high performer is how internal they are. They're all self-based, right? They're inner work. Whereas from the outside perspective, looking at an athlete, you see just the physical and you don't necessarily look or really, unless you do your research, unless you really know like how much of the inner work is being done on a daily basis to reach that peak performance. And so I love it because we all are capable of doing this, right? If we want to do it. I think going along the lines of bringing this into the corporate world, this 1%, and let's take athletes, because I know this is, an easier one to work with. They have coaches. They have people who are helping them through this all the time. And in the corporate world, you can say we have managers, we have mentors, we have coaches as well. But because this is so individual based and then team based and then humanity based, like, what would you almost recommend, or what works in a company if it is really starting with the individual? How do you make those impacts, on a larger scale in the corporate world?
Yeah, such a great question, Jackie. And I think one, it has to start with a culture that goes, we want to be a high performing culture. And I think a lot of companies may be high performing, but haven't made that statement that goes, it is important for us to be a high performing culture. Because once you say that part, it drops you into going, okay, how do I do that? I now have a goal, but how do I do it? It's not just, we're sort of just paddling around, but we don't have a location that we're paddling to. So I think that's the first part in it. The second part that I would say around it is I would pull back and go, let's look at how great athletes are performing over a career. And I think as a company, and all companies, if we take that first step that goes, we want to be a high performing company, then we go, let's first off of that, create really high performing individuals. And I would look at it very similar to a sports team. You know what? If you're coming into an organization and you're our most valuable asset, and as people are probably the highest OpEx on a P&L, we need to treat them as our most valuable asset. And that sounds cliche, but even when you go to a place like special operations, one of the first things that you hear is the most important asset is the human, right? We can't go do anything, even in these things that are unimaginable, never thought done, because the number one asset is the human. So I think we pull that back, things like where you go, should people have coaches at companies? Probably. Should we look at, when we look at high performance for an individual as they come in, should they probably all be taking some kind of psychometric, evaluation that helps them understand themselves better, whether that's VIAs or DISCs or Enneagrams, or we can think of it starts to reflect back on ourselves? Probably. Should we then be taking those learnings and going, I'm now going to learn those for myself, but I'm also going to share that out to my team so I can go, I understand myself better, but now my team actually understands how to get the best out of me as well, I think is really important. It's interesting, and it's going a little tangential here, but one of the things that we do that we found so effective is what we do what's called an iOS for yourself. And the idea being you can buy almost any piece of technology and it will come with directions on how to operate it. Yet again, you go back to the human is the most complex thing that the world has ever seen. And there are no directions. And if I asked even two people who have sat next to each other in offices or cubicles for 30 years, and I asked them very basic questions about how to get the best out of each other, they probably wouldn't know. They probably wouldn't know what the person wanted to be remembered for, what their 3 highest values are, how to communicate with them under stress, how to give feedback, any of those. And so, we often, and I'm happy to share it, with you and listeners, it's just this part that goes, hey, here's the operating system of me. Here's how to get the best out of me. And it's both a reflective piece that goes, I have to think about that, because very few people actually go, how do I get the best out of me? And then the second part that goes, how do I share that with others? And so now we're in a team that's really going, I know how to operate you, you know how to operate me, man, we're headed for high performance here.
So I'm curious, Hoby, as I'm thinking about this, one of the things that, running track when I was young, or thinking about sports, just staying in this family and then kind of translating that over to the working world, how do we, as we democratize human performance, as you said, how do we think about kind of allowing people to be who they are without pushing everyone into the 1%? Because I imagine it's like, if everyone goes to the 1%, then there becomes a smaller 1%, right? So what does it look like to kind of engage democratization of peak performance and also allow everyone to have different levels of what 100% of their performance looks like?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great question. And it's one, I think even you take the Nikes of the world and the Adidas of the world and you look at their marketing, how it's changed over time, where it used to be put the very best in the world right out in front. They're the ones that inspire us. If you're not one of those, put them off to the side. And I think even in, sports, you've seen that change with how we get marketed to and who we find our inspiration in. One I pull back on, and I'll put it both in the research, but I think it's powerful when you think about it, and it's all the way back to, if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, where if you look at the very top of that, the top of the pyramid, it's self-actualization, and the definition of that generally, I'll paraphrase here, but is that realization or fulfillment of one's talent and potentialities. So you go, to your point, okay, it's really easy to get pulled into the 1% of, oh, I'm not that person. What does that look like? But if I think we can pull back to that self-actualization piece at the top of the pyramid, we go, you know what? Whatever I am doing, it's the best me, right? I think it goes right back to growth mindset in the same way. It's, hey, we care about process, not outcome. Across those, I'm always, how do I get 1% better every single day? And so I think it's just a refocus on that.
Yeah, it sort of sounds like, you said defining for companies, we want to be a high performing company. And I wrote down, I want to be a high performing human.
Yeah.
But that's as it relates to me, which is such a great point. And back to Jackie's point of much of these 7 things you said is the inner work and knowing ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's the inner work. And I think it's, pulling back to those things that goes, one, if I am starting with, do I know myself? But also, where are some of those things? And generally where we find, a lot of joy are things where, sort of our mastery is equaling the challenge. I mean, that's sort of that definition of flow. And there is a part that goes, I generally find passion in things where I have some talent in it. You know what I mean? And so I think it's okay also for people to go and be drawn to things where they go, you know what? I'm really good at this. And that's okay. Even if someone says you should be doing this or you should be doing that, you know what? If I can link up where I have a lot of talent with where I have a lot of passion and own my inner game, gosh, I can get to a lot of self-actualization and be in a really good spot thriving.
Yeah. And it just shows how individualized we all are. But then when we are all at our best, at our peak, collectively, we're elevating whatever humanity, right? That's humanity 2.0 when we focus on the individual. You had said before, people get to greatness in different ways. And then you kind of went through the 7 aspects of peak performance. And, all of a sudden I was like, well, what is greatness? What does greatness mean to me? What does greatness mean to Leah? What does greatness mean to you? And how do each of us on our own define that? And is there one definition of what greatness is, or is that very much up to the individual to define for themselves?
I just love that, Jack, because I think it also goes to, sometimes people will make this stratification of high performance. That's for the elite. Thriving and flourishing, that's for the other 99%. And I think one of the things I believe strongly, and again, it goes with longevity, is we have to combine this idea of high performance with thriving and flourishing. And that's how we start to get to our best selves over time. That's how we start to get to lifting humanity. And so, I mean, there's absolutely, things where you go and we all see it. Some of the best athletes in the world come game day on that one day, they're not thriving. They're not flourishing. They would actually, in some of the endurance athletes, look like cancer patients if you actually went in and did bloods on them, et cetera, because of where they are on game day. We might say they're very high performing on game day, but I don't know that that's what it looks like, over time to be thriving. And there can be ups and downs. So I'm certainly not discounting, the importance of, what game day can look like on that. And they'll come back on that same thing of, hey, it's game day. Now I'm going to regenerate. I'll be back. Now I'm training. I'm periodized back to the next thing that I need to do. But I do think it's important how we take those two concepts, and start to bring them together in better ways.
Mm-hmm.
Hoby, I don't know if you've read the book Ikigai, but a lot of what you're saying reminds me of this longevity, because the book is based on the fact that there are these areas in the world that are blue zones where people live longer than everywhere else, and Okinawa is one. And one of the stories they share is, the Ikigai is this mix of this passion, but also the purpose or the reason for being. And something as simple as someone going to go garden every day can be enough to be a reason for being, which can draw them out of bed, draw them forward. And it's more about the flourishing and the thriving than it is about the performance. And I think that's sometimes where people break, is the kind of performance anxiety that we have at work, at home, in school, and this sort of like, if I achieve X, then I'm enough versus am I thriving? Am I flourishing? Can I do the small thing with enough purpose to get me up out of bed every day and keep me going?
Yeah, I mean, it's so true. And I think so much of that is framing, to your part, whether you're, talking about someone who's getting up to tend to garden. I always come back to the story of, the bricklayers, one who's talking about just laying bricks and the other who's laying bricks for someone to have their spiritual awakening, all doing the same things, but going, how am I framing this in a way, that I feel so positive about my movement forward and I want to get up and I want to be the best that I can be.
On this topic of democratizing human performance, because Leah and I just found this so incredible and are so intrigued by it. Knowing, how you're working with, let's say, the 1%, the elite, but the vision or the mission is to really expand this to the 7 billion humans on this planet. What are you doing today to make that a reality?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say we're definitely on a journey. For us, we tend to always start at that 1% because that's what, does push us. It raises the tent pole, what's possible for everything else. So, we do spend a significant amount of time with those 1% groups going, what are your biggest dreams? How do we go fulfill them? What are humanity's boldest endeavors? How do we go achieve it? So that's where we always start. I think what we've found over time is we almost have to go back to how as humans, do we like to get information? How do we have behavior change? How are we inspired? And so now we've spent a lot more time doing things like storytelling. So we started a media group just recently, instead of going, hey, let's write articles and put them out and people have to read them. Let's engage people in a storytelling way. So we've started a podcast that we're doing right now with a major brand and a docuseries. It's an original content production that we're doing around sort of places that inspire greatness and what does that look like. Doing a little bit of production on resilience and grit with kind of an A-list star. So again, people get into the storytelling of it. But we're focusing there right now on how do we tell these grand stories. So everyone, again, we don't want to go, we just want the 1%. We don't even want to go, we just want, the 3 or 5%. But how do we reach people? And as humans, going all the way back to just this, how do we take advantage of our biology and neuroscience? We know that when we storytell, people store that information really well. So that's kind of the quest we're on of how do we democratize right now.
And Hoby, if I'm me and I don't get to hang out with you every day and go do all this work with you, and I'm listening to this inspired, what's something I can do now, today or tomorrow, that will help get me closer to peak performance for myself? Yeah,
I love it. One of the things I always think about is you can come up with really cool philosophical things, but as one of my partners say, what can I do on Monday to actually make this happen? And I think if I said one thing, it would be, how do I start the Leah game plan? Let's go right back to our sports analogy or marathon analogy that goes, hey, here is my goal at some time, just as if I'm an athlete. If I'm an athlete, it's win Super Bowl in this or whatever it is. Here's my goal. And I say this in starting as just a process. Here's my goal. Here's how I'm getting better to achieve that every single day. Here's the moment that matters, or the couple moments during the season that matter around it. How am I putting together a plan around that is on the calendar of how I'm going to make sure that I'm regenerating and that I'm now in a flow that goes, I'm going to start that on Monday, and that's going to be till the rest of the year. I've got, let's call it 3 months till the end of the year. Actually, 2 months now till the end of the year. And then on January 2nd, I'm going to redo that game plan of Leah so that I have a year in advance. Here's my goal. Here's my plan. Here's game day. And here's regeneration, I think helps. And then the second thing I would just say, and you're doing it with Jackie, and I know you're doing it with others, go find that team of people that you go, these are the people who I know are my peeps who are going to be right next to me, inspiring me, challenging me. But who is that cohort of people that I have right next to me to keep me going?
Hoby, you opened up this episode today by asking a question to our listeners, and it was, how do you want to be remembered and what will be your legacy? And I'm curious, how do you want to be remembered?
Yeah, I love flipping it right back to me, Jackie, on that. I mean, I think the biggest part goes back to my values that I started at the beginning, that were around inspiring, around caring, and around growing. So I think the biggest thing, if it was in one sentence, is I think people would go, I know that Hoby really cared about what he did in the community, with his family, in work, and made everyone around him better. And if people said that, I would feel like that was a life well lived.
Love it. Hoby, this has been great. I mean, I could dig in with you for another 5 hours on each of these topics that you talked about to get us to peak performance. But something that I'm kind of taking away as a theme is this idea of greatness in everyone. And I feel like that's where you're going with Humanity 2.0, and how do we kind of all awaken the greatness within each of us and allow ourselves to decide what that looks like and how that measures versus comparison to others, while also being inspired by others. So just thank you so much for giving us, this time to sit with you, to learn more about what you're learning in the research, and spending time with the top 1% that most of us don't get to spend time with, but, would love to steal a piece of their magic to create the life we want. So just appreciate you being here. And any final thoughts from you, Hoby, before we wrap up?
I think just thank you both for putting this together. I mean, the greatest thing I think that you can do for us as we think about that Humanity 2.0 is push out the message, communicate. You all have an audience, as well as friends, as well as colleagues. How do we get to a spot where we're lifting all ships and all boats so that we can make that dent in the universe? So thank you.
Love it. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you so much, Hoby.
Cheers.
Awesome. And for our listeners, thanks for joining us on the journey. We are so excited to keep going. We've got more amazing guests. And, if you want more of Hoby, you can find him on LinkedIn, look up Liminal Collective. So Hoby, I'm totally offering you up to our listeners, but I'm sure you're open to it. And if you want more of In the Arena, it's on Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and iHeartRadio. And we will see you next time.
Have a great day, everyone.